Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this roundtable on the topic of public washrooms. I'm Tom Reynolds, the Chief Executive of the Bathroom Manufacturers Association. I'm pleased to be chairing this session. Since the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, public leaders have focused on the importance of good hand hygiene and hand washing. And the UK, as it emerged from the first lockdowns, it became very clear that a lack of good sanitation facilities was a brake on the country getting back to ordinary life. So as we leave the second lockdown, that's when this recording's taking place, we've assembled a really diverse and distinguished panel of roundtable participants to explore this issue and, more importantly, to propose some solutions. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to very briefly introduce themselves and explain who they are in the context of Washroom. So, Rich, could I start with you, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Richard Braid. I'm Managing Director of Systemizer Kerryflow, and we're a key supplier of WC and washroom controls primarily into the commercial sector. And it's an area that we're very keen on looking to promote the commercial washroom, but also the challenges that it's approaching in the next few years and through to 2050 in the zero carbon washroom.
Thank you, Rich. Tom.
Hello, my name is Tom Riley, and I am the co-founder of Lockdown Loo, which is something I started with my brother during the first lockdown in order to help people find open toilets during the pandemic.
Thank you, Tom. Karen.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Karen Ho. I'm the Changing Places National Development Coordinator. So I work under the umbrella charity of Muscular Dystrophy UK, who at the moment obviously are hosting the campaign. So I do everything that comes with Changing Places, basically, which it's a whole length of A4 side of paper to go through, but also basically I manage the campaigners, do all the social media, and obviously register all the toilets and obviously liaise with architects and venues over all the draft plans for the future Changing Places too. Okay.
Thank you, Karen. Raymond.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Managing Director of the British Toilet Association. The BTA has been in operation for over 20 years, and we work on behalf of local authorities, commercial and private suppliers and providers, trying to raise the standards of hygiene and provision right across the country. We sit with BSI, the British Standards, help to put the British Standards together, and also sit on the board of BCC, the British Cleaning Council, who are working to keep the standards up as far as cleaners and hygiene and all those things, those controls are concerned.
Thank you, Raymond. Tony.
My name is Tony Reinberg, and I represent Ideal Standard and Armitage Shanks. So I've worked in marketing on commercial washrooms for around about 15 years, and certainly this subject is something very close to my heart and to Armitage Shanks.
Thank you, Tony. And last but not least, Ian.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ian Tomlinson. I'm the Commercial Director of Closomat. Closomat are a manufacturer of a toilet, a wash and dry toilet, which is primarily used in the UK by people with disabilities. Generally installed in people's own homes, but we do supply into public washrooms via the Changing Places channel that Karen previously discussed. And so we do install and service and maintain those after being in.
So let's get straight into the discussion. Wanted to start by exploring the real life impacts of a lack of public washrooms and limited availability, and start first of all with the health risks. We are, after all, in the midst of a pandemic. Health is at the forefront of everyone's minds. Tony, you've got some thoughts about the health risks of not having enough public washrooms available.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I guess there are a number of different reasons why this is an issue. I mean, first of all, there are a number of people who have medical conditions, which means that they have to use a toilet frequently. And if they don't know where the toilets are or they're restricted, they are very restricted in where they can venture out. I mean, sometimes it's called loo leash because it means you can only go as far as the toilet you know. So that has major restrictions for anybody such as that. But the other thing is just everybody in general I think there's some interesting, we did some research with the RSPH, and I think they found that over half the population restrict their fluid intake because they're concerned about, are they going to be able to find a toilet? So deliberate dehydration isn't very good for you. I mean, you know, the extreme, it can cause weakness, dizziness, reduced physical performance. I've got a whole long list here. Reduced short memory, depression, constipation, all sorts of different health issues. You know, the fact that you're having to hold it in. And then I guess sort of finally, if you're going to put it into 3 different sections, I would say sanitation is the other key thing. That the reason why public toilets were set up in the 19th century was to sort of, you know, stop public urination and etc. And you know, without toilets, that's you know, going to be a real issue.
Of course, public toilet is a major public health intervention, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Karen, MD UK represents people with a particular type of condition. How can a lack of facilities affect the people that you represent?
Okay, so when it comes to obviously our changing places users, then obviously we can completely echo everything that Tony said in terms of the dehydration, because obviously whilst we're talking about public toilets, there's even fewer changing places out there as well. So the changing places toilets obviously are required by probably over 250,000 people, but sometimes they have to travel a couple of hours to find a suitable toilet that has the relevant equipment for them. And often at the minute they can also be closed as well due to COVID restrictions. So lots of our users have the health implications, like I said, having to hold the bladder intake, the dehydration issue, obviously causing infections. I mean, some of our users have had to go to the extremes, having to have operations and surgery to have, you know, stomas fitted and different things because they just can't find suitable toilets when they go out. You've also got on top of that the issues of, you know, people that may have to wear pads. They can't have their pads changed if they're having to travel for hours to find a suitable toilet as well. So the hygiene issues and health issues are really exasperated for a lot of our changing place users if they can't find a decent toilet, which at the minute there's probably only just about 1,500 across the whole of the UK. So we expect to be able to walk down the street and use a public toilet, you know, but for our changing places users, they sometimes have to travel hours to find a toilet.
You know, BTA is a major champion of good public washrooms and growing the number of public washrooms. For you, Raymond, it's about dignity, isn't it?
It's very much about dignity and health and well-being and social inclusion and equality and working with public toilets. So we all have a human right to clean water and sanitation. It comes through the European Commission, whatever. And really, you know, if we expect people to go out and move about the country, go and visit friends, go to work, travel around, whatever, then these people are going to need to, we're all going to need to have a public toilet. And when we find a public toilet, that toilet has to be fit for purpose. It has to be hygienically clean. It has to be ready and fit for people to go into. And I think Karen put it very well. Health and hygiene are the 2 biggest things, particularly with this COVID thing that we have now. Hygiene has been escalated right up the scale. And we've got to find a way of making sure that these units are complete as they are. But in our everyday lives, we have to do 5 things. We have to eat, sleep, drink, breathe, and go to the toilet. And failure to do any of those 5 things, we can become very sick. We can become dizzy and disorientated, as Tony was saying, or we can go into high blood pressure, even stroke, heart attack, and it can actually be fatal. So carrying about poisons in our body is not a good thing. We have to dispense them. We have to get rid of them. And public toilets are just an absolute necessity to each and every one of us in the right place.
So I think we've summarised quite neatly there that really people are at the heart of this issue, but places too. And I want to explore for a few moments the impact that a lack of public toilets can have on society and economy. And can we come to you first, Tom, on this, because you felt compelled to do something?
Yes, I've probably come at it a bit selfishly. All of this during the summer, my brother and I, we were out in a park trying to enjoy some of the early sun after the first, well, near the end of the first lockdown, and suddenly, you know, there were I guess normally people would go behind a bush. Certainly, if you were a bloke, that's what people tend to do. But it was very busy, lots of people there, and it's not suddenly an option. And we were, caught short, which is how it began for us. We had to make a mad run back through West London to use the toilet we had at home, and we started looking into this, and a lot of them obviously were closed during the lockdown by councils, and many are still closed or only partially opened. And we decided surely something could be done about it if we maybe crowdsourced, and we did. And what we found is certainly places that people use, which are really vital actually during these last 6 or 7 months. Good mental health, being able to go out when you can, whether it be to a park or to the high street, if you were supporting restaurants or shops and retail, then there isn't the availability that I guess there has been in the past. I think there is probably less public toilets today than there have ever been, and the impact is, it does stop people going out. And when we started, we thought we'd be serving, I guess, people like ourselves, people that wanted to go out to a park and have a drink. But it's so many different groups of people who can be impacted from, it'd be runners, people that would use changing places toilets, which obviously were, some of those might be at supermarkets or whatnot, and they were closed. And we had lots of cases of people giving us tales where they were stuck, as Tony said earlier, on the loo leash, or couldn't leave the bladder zone, and it's not good for people's mental health, and it certainly isn't good for the economy.
Rich, can I come to you now and ask what you think a quality washroom, publicly available, what impact that can make on a community?
I think it can have quite a considerable impact on the community, not only whether it's open or not, but also the condition it's in, and that goes to a certain way back to funding and the services that are actually available in the washroom itself. I guess the key thing is for them to be open, which is the first challenge, and I know we'll speak about funding a little bit later, but that washroom does have, as all the guys have said recently, have a real impact on the local community, the local environment, but also the local economy of somebody, the ability to pop into town, to pop into the local shops. We know even prior to COVID that the high street was under huge pressure in terms of the out of town shopping centres, that side of things, and there's been a lot of work, certainly where I live, and I know in other areas, to try and drive people to the high street. The unfortunate thing with that is if there aren't public washrooms open, that is a real restrictor for people to, like I say, to be off I hadn't heard the loo leash before, but I would definitely use that going forward. But to be really restricted by those. And a lot of the feedback we've had, even, like I said, prior to COVID, but COVID has obviously accelerated almost the death of the high street to a certain extent, that washrooms really represent it. They're a key decision-making factor, whether to go out or not, in many instances. And the work Tom and his brother have done, I think, that we've seen and we've started to partner with, has been great, because at least that's given people some confidence to go out, and that's the confidence we need to try and maintain and increase as we come out of, hopefully, second lockdown. There's a vaccine on its way, and the key thing is to try and encourage those facilities, whether they be shops or leisure centres or parks or anything like that anything we can do to help people take advantage of those and start to support the local community and economy is really key. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about funding, and over the last few years where maybe these public washrooms have been neglected, I don't think there's a connection between the facilities and what impact it could have to the greater community. And it's something that we supply products into that market, but we're very conscious of it's something that we're really quite passionate about, that it should help to develop the local community and the economy as well as just the washroom itself.
I think what Tom really described in really vivid terms there was how lockdown has brought this issue to a fore, but it's not a new issue, is it? And
No.
it's something that certainly, among others, Raymond's been talking about for a long time. And that there is some legislation in the offing, perhaps not what we need, but some legislation that can help this issue. Raymond, do you want to talk a little about that?
Over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years, BTA has been working with a lot of partners on trying to remove the rates, the non-domestic rates that were on every single public toilet in the country. So just as of September this year, actually November last year, we got it into Parliament. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister then prorogued Parliament and everything got thrown out. But then when we managed to get it back in again in the early part of the new year, when the government released the rates for local businesses, we went back and said, look, we need them off public toilets as well. So as of September, the non-domestic brackets public lavatories bill has now passed its way through Parliament. It's gone back to the House of Lords and it'll hopefully go for royal assent, which will make it a law. So what it'll do, it'll remove the rates from all public toilets, all standalone public toilets in the country. Now we have a caveat with the government and with the opposition to say, look, there's a number of other issues we need to look at here. We need to look at other sites as well, sites in public buildings, sites in airports and seaports and all the rest of it, because these places they're such a vital piece of infrastructure, such an essential service as what we're talking about here today, that we need to see public toilets on every street corner. We need to see them where people can find them. And as Richard just said there, toilets are not about waste management. They're about health and well-being, which is what we're discussing here today. They're about social inclusion and equality. They're about public dignity, which Richard and Tony have talked about as well, as does Tom. And really, they are a big economic factor in the high street. People will move away. We're losing the footfall. We're losing the high streets, and the government wants us to come back there again. And the Prime Minister's talked about putting 5 billion back into the high streets and whatever. And we're now talking to him saying, well, how much of that money is going to be ring fenced for public toilets? Because it has to be. We have to have toilets in public places. Otherwise, people will move away.
So the ratings bill is one piece of legislation. Another policy that's come to the fore in recent years is changing places. And Ian, you mentioned in your introduction that that's something that your company particularly supplies into. Can you describe the changing places initiative?
Yeah, I mean, we've been involved with it for a number of years now, and the initiative is to get an increasing number of changing places into public places, and these are retail parks, transport hubs, and all the sort of places where people with disabilities would need to use this type of facility. So I mean, we've seen the market change, over a period of time. It's becoming there's certainly most of the funding has come from the retail side, which is good. We've been involved with some of the people like IKEA and Wetherspoons, and it's really good, as Karen mentioned before, about government funding coming into this now, and that will hopefully add another layer of investment into that marketplace, because it is absolutely key, particularly to our customers. I mean, we have over probably 100,000 Closet customers in the UK, and they need to get out. We support them in their domestic environment, but they need to have these facilities out in the public environment to help them, again, with the health and well-being. And it's not just their own health and well-being, it's also the families that are linked to support them. So it's not just the individual person, there's a whole network of support around these people that require these facilities.
Karen, obviously you've got changing places in your job title even as development officer. Do you want to chip in on this?
We've been working mostly as the campaigners or the drivers of this. Obviously, they've been working for years and years and years also to try and get this into building regs. And I think we had a really successful meeting with Rishi Sunak, who also is now Chancellor, but a couple of years ago we met with him, and obviously the campaigners and facilitated conversations in Parliament with them about the need of getting these into building regs going forward. And obviously we're delighted. Obviously he's very supportive, and obviously committed to this. Obviously in July we had the announcement this year that obviously there's going to be that 30 million put into funding for changing places to go into new buildings, as well as obviously it going into the building regs and becoming lawful from the 1st of January next year as well. So this is a massive breakthrough for obviously the world of changing places, and obviously we're delighted that campaigners have driven this and paid a part, and obviously now it's going to be managing this into the next stage as to how that's going to look, and which areas it's going to go into. And obviously we had the successful Department of Transport funding, which is now seeing more change in places going into motorway service stations. So we're keen to see from the government how this next stage of funding is going to be looking and offering, and to get the finer details to help get these out there and get more change in places available for the people that need them. So
positive direction of travel on changing places. As with all things in the public realm, money, of course, is a factor. Tony, you got some thoughts on the kind of history of public toilet funding?
Yes, so I guess nobody's ever really wanted to fund them, and it sort of goes back into sort of the 19th century, where before you have public toilets, they had things called nuisances, and they were a nuisance because they were sort of these areas where people would urinate or whatever, and all the sewage and everything would just go out into the street. So it seems a nuisance straight away. And it sort of goes back into the middle of the 19th century, the Great Exhibition, where they had the first public toilet. And that's where Spend a Penny came from. So they tried to fund it by, by people actually paying to go. And I think that was successful. But then when they tried to do it on a bigger scale a little bit later on, it didn't work, and it was not profitable. So if you sort of go back, I mean, a heyday in public toilets was sort of towards the end of the 19th century. And again, this idea of spending a penny sort of continued virtually right way through to decimalisation. But it's really been authorities over time that have funded public toilets, although there is not necessarily any requirement for local authorities to provide public toilets. And I guess the more and more cutbacks have been, the more pressure has been to close toilets. And I think if you look over the last sort of 10 years, the amount of toilets has just really reduced because they are very expensive to keep up. So that's sort of little potted history in terms of where we are.
So treated like, waste management in kind of various different silos of local government. Rich, you feel that we need to shift the paradigm, don't you? And that we need to start thinking about public toilets as infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the things we've spoken about in the last 10 or 15 minutes sort of reiterates a lot of that argument about how key that the public washroom is. As Tony said regarding the funding, they are quite an expensive service to fund. It's not a legal requirement to have them, and it's a really easy cost saving, given they're not compelled to have them. They're quite expensive. I know. Let's cut them. But what I believe there isn't an awareness of, and what we're hopefully through this and other mediums that we can do, is to actually demonstrate how the public washroom is a key element of the infrastructure of the community within the towns and within the economy. As we spoke earlier, it is around footfall into the local high street is encouraged through having that washroom, and we believe there's a big disconnect between the understanding of the washroom and its cost, and the benefit that it brings to the local community, the local town, the local environment, even from whether it be footfall into the town centres or health and well-being of people going to parks and things like that. And similar, I think I might have mentioned this before, but my two sons play football, and even before lockdown, mums are turning up first thing in the morning, or dads and things, and the toilets are closed, the changing rooms are closed, and these are public parks, public football pitches where that there's been a budget cut, so changing rooms aren't open, so public WC facilities aren't available. So I think it's a key thing across the board: the economy, the well-being, and one of our sort of objectives as a business is to raise that and bring all the connections together, because I think they're just seen as a cost, and as we've all said, they're much more to the whole community and how everything works and how everybody moves around the country in that respect.
And you probably should add in there tourism as well. We're doing a lot of work with Scotland and Wales and whatever at the moment, and they're expecting to see a 60% or more rise in staycations and people coming and visiting. And once this border comes down and people pour into Wales or across the borders, whatever, where are they going to go to the toilet? Where are they going to stay? And if they can't spend time in the towns, they need to go to the toilet. They're going to get up and leave and take their money with them. And this is where toilets have a massive economic factor. They have a massive influence on local economies.
Yeah, I totally agree, Raymond. I think one of our biggest things when we talk about infrastructure is just how they're connected to everything, and by breaking that one link in the chain, can have quite a considerable impact on the local community and the economy.
And there's a massive thing as well, because we've got lorry drivers flying up and down the country, delivering essential goods, foods, and stuff to pharmacies and all that sort of stuff. And these guys are 5-6 hours in the cab. And 17% of the lorry drivers are women at this point in time. So where do they go to the toilets? So the toilets are all closed. You're now adding an extra dimension where you have people traveling at speed with retaining bodily fluids and whatever sort of stuff, and the potential to become dizzy or disorientated. That's a danger on the roads. So we've already been speaking to Crime Stoppers and the police and such like about the problem of not only that, but mobile phones, people looking at their phones to see where the nearest toilet is. So things like Tom's doing with the mapping is fantastic, whatever, because there's a whole range of issues all in behind here, and toilets are a part of our everyday life. We need good facilities. We need more and more spent on them.
Sorry,
just come to Tom next, actually, and you mentioned, Raymond, there the mapping exercise. Tom, when you went about kind of mapping out where all public loos were and who were responsible for them, what did you find about actually who's taking ownership?
Well, we found very quickly that no two toilets are the same in this country. They all seem to have their kind of own particulars and identity. So when we started, we relied a lot on people very kindly telling us and where kind of toilets were. And we also spoke to a lot of councils, because local authorities running and taking ownership of public toilets. And what we tended to find would happen is you would go to a council and go, oh, we're just wondering which of your public toilets are available. You've got a list on your a bit of a list on your website, but it can't surely just be two. And they go, oh, actually, if you speak to our parish councils, they will have the details for you. You're like, yeah, brilliant. I'll speak to the parish councils then. And then they go, oh, here's a list of 90 just for our area. And then you go to, you start working your way through parish councils, and then the parish council goes, well, actually, we do have some toilets, but they're run by community teams who, keep them going. So therefore, it's another break. So what we tended to find is, and I guess a real light has been kind of shone on this because of the pandemic, is the buck of, I guess, ownership of public toilets is sort of thrown down the road a little. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. All the people give us comments when they've been sending us locations, and a lot of the comments for community or toilets in villages or towns which are going are always really, really positive. And I think it's because these are people who, they really need them, they rely on them. They, I guess, in this sort of strange way, they kind of love them because they're an essential part of where they live. But it means that there's no consistency. So there are some areas that we found there'll be toilets, but there might be we've not been told, or what we found or discovered is there's no baby change or disabled access for people in certain areas, but there are in others. And you have these you can get these black spots developing where there's just no kind of coverage or availability of toilets at all. So it's incredible. Toilets are incredibly fragmented, and I think one of the bits that I've learned is, I think Wales, they have to, every local authority in Wales has to set a toilet strategy as to how they're going to run and manage and where they're going over the next 5 years or whatever. but that isn't the case for the rest of the country. And I do wonder whether, you know, that is a good approach or not. It sounds like it might be working in Wales. Certainly, we've got a lot of locations plotted across Wales, but yeah, so certainly that's what we learned. No two toilets are the same, and by that happening, it does mean that they're easier, I think, to fall away and fall off the map, because it only takes, you know, one that's been running by a community that can't support it anymore, and therefore you're losing, you know, maybe one or two a week, or, you know, so it all adds up.
Ian, you've got great experience of working with local authorities in that sort of fragmented environment. What are some of the lessons that perhaps we can take into this discussion about public washrooms?
Yeah, I think I can echo a lot of what Tom was describing there. We've, you know, in terms of change in place, obviously this probably reflects the whole market. You've got different views and passions. I think successful businesses or local authorities who have a long-term view will always, you know, will provide a good facility that will last. You've got others who will, you know, unfortunately they'll pay lip service to getting a you know, changing place in a washroom, and then as soon as it's completed, they either don't want to or not interested in the long-term maintenance of it, or they, you know, they just forget about it, as Tom said, because, you know, we've seen that quite often where we've worked with, you know, a campaign has done fantastic work with local authorities to get something in place, and then, you know, we install it, and then 6 months, 12 months later, when we go back to maintain it, it's just not used. There's no signage. I mean, I went to one person down in Newbury Leisure Centre where there was a folded up table tennis table pulled across the door, so there's no way anybody could access it. And I think it's that it's having a joined up approach, which we've all discussed, you know, in this chat now. It's having a joined up approach with a common goal, because I think all the different elements at the moment, you know, with retailers, with government, with, you know, with campaigns, everybody's got a slightly different view, and it doesn't work. Everybody, it's got to be a long-term view. I think that's my, you know, the strong emphasis. It's got to be long-term. It can't be short-term.
So, Rich, $1 million question: who should take ownership and give us that strategic long-term view?
I think it's got to come from the government and filter down, because it's the only way that we will actually land some form of sort of strategic direction, I guess. And as Tom said, it seems to be working in Wales. There seems to be some consistency and that side of things. And is it part for us to lobby that situation, to start that ball rolling? Then possibly. And I think it does need that top-down approach, because as we know at the moment, it's sort of filtering down. We'd like you to do it, okay, we will, but gradually it tails off at the end, and then funding becomes tight or budgets become tight, and they're one of the first areas to look at to go. So I think as I said before, in terms of the infrastructure, there's an element of ensuring that it's part of that infrastructure, but also the impact of not having them is key. And I think there's something that we can do to ensure that there's a realization of what the service that they provide really offers to the local community, both upwards and downwards. So I think it really does need a top-down approach, and I think, judging between what people have said, that's the only way it will be successful.
Raymond, when we've spoken in the past, you've talked about that no one wanting to be the Minister for Loos.
Absolutely.
That wasn't my pitch either, by the way. So
well, it actually comes back into Wales, and I'll just clarify one of the points. We did an extensive bit of work in Wales in putting the Public Health Act together with that time was Mark Drakeford, who was the minister. He's now First Minister, but at that time he was the minister we were working for, and it was Mark Drakeford who came to us and said, listen, we're putting together a Public Health Act for Wales. We're going to look at pharmacies and well-being centres and tourist information and highways and all the rest of it. But one of the things we really realise is public toilets are an absolute necessity. If we want to make Wales a beautiful place to come and visit and live in and work in and whatever, and for our children to grow up, then toilets are absolutely vital to that whole game. So he was switched on, and we didn't have to push at that door. And literally we worked with the departments. We worked with Karen and the team and Claire, whatever it was, at Changing Places. We worked with Crohn's and Colitis and a number of other groups, and we pulled all that legislation together. So you're quite right, Tom. There's a strategy. Every council in Wales has to put a strategy now to deliver public toilets, but actually that strategy doesn't have any effect on delivering public toilets. There's no outcome. They have to sit down and look at whether they need them or not. They have to try and decide how many people with accessible issues they have. What about tourism? What about children going to and from school, etc., etc. But it doesn't put a compunction on them to build any more toilets or do anything. However, there is a strategy. At least every council is thinking about it. And what we are now looking for through Simon Clarke and through the ministry, and it probably comes down to Matt Hancock, whatever, because he's the Minister for Health in England. It really comes down to this is a health and well-being, which is where we started off. And really the Department of Health should be taking the lead on this and saying toilets are about health and well-being. So, what do we need to do to make sure there's toilets? And they should be working with this group and with government or with the local authorities to try and make that happen.
Perhaps Mark Drakeford's a good advert for this then. If
Very much so.
The minister that gets to grips with it makes it to the top quicker. So,
well, I wrote to the minister. I wrote to the minister because through the government put £3.2 billion forward to fight the pandemic and gave it to local authorities to fight the pandemic. And I went to the minister and said, well, can you tell me, number one, can you tell me how much of that money is ring fenced for public toilets? And number two, can you ring fence the 0.2 of the billion? We don't want the 3 billion, we just want the 0.2. If you give us 0.2, we can spread that across not the BTA, give the industry the 0.2, and we'll spread that across the thing because there's so much work we need to do. In the same way as we're working with Changing Places with a diverse group who need the people with profound and multiple handicaps, whatever. There's also in groups of, there's ladies, women, shopping centres, children, people with multiple emotional and physical capabilities, which we need to look at, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, the minister did write back and said, I'm sorry, we are totally supportive of what you're doing. Please talk to your local authority. And just batted the ball straight back over the net again, back to the local authority who have no legal requirement to do anything.
Great demonstration of what we've been talking about. Yeah. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes taking a slightly different take on this and connecting public washrooms with some of our environmental aspirations. Clearly we've been talking about underinvestment, and bathrooms have come a long way in terms of their ability to contribute positively to the environment. Rich, do you have any thoughts about water efficiency of public toilets and how that can connect to the net zero carbon agenda?
Yeah, it's something that we realise that in public washrooms can potentially use an extraordinary amount of water, obviously depending on their usage and location. And as part of our sort of roadmap and how we're looking at the marketplace is looking at how we can start to reduce the amount of water used in the public washrooms, hopefully to also help create the maintenance of them and the increase of washrooms. Because if we can reduce that cost of water or the cost of wastewater, they become much more of a viable service. And we're looking at ways that we can reduce water usage through electronic flushing, also around occupancy levels. Some of the work we do within commercial and office space at the moment, where we monitor levels and washing times or flushing times, we're looking at whether that can then go into more of the public washrooms, so we can monitor occupancy, so that if there's an automatic flush, we can prevent that happening, but also leak detection and that sort of thing. So I think we're very much focusing around sort of some of the technology that maybe is being used in other areas that could help towards that zero carbon element. Some of the things we've even been looking at is to use the water that we use to flush the urinal can actually charge the battery that's then being used to monitor the facility itself. That's a little bit of a stretch forward, but there's things that we're looking at in that sense. So I think that there can be some real some of the technology we're already using. We're now looking to be able to incorporate that into the public washrooms, because it will be a key area to look at from a zero carbon point of view.
And Tony, your company represents some brands that are perhaps some of the most familiar in public washrooms. You've been doing some research around how to improve and get better and better within the public washroom space. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, yes, certainly. Yeah, we have done some work, and it is in terms of, we were actually looking at more upmarket washrooms in offices, in restaurants and things like that, and try to get people's opinions in terms of the public, but also in terms of the people who are behind it. So they might be the building owners, they might be the architects or interior designers. And interestingly, when you think of our conversation we've been having, we've been saying the lack of toilets around, there is a recognition on the commercial side that they are very, very important. I mean, they can help sell a building, for instance. If you've got an empty office block, the one thing you can actually show off is your toilets. And I think people have to recognize, and do often recognize, that it is a reflection of your building that you're selling, if you like, or the image that you want to portray. Is no good having a fantastic restaurant if your toilets look dirty or unclean. And same with hotels, same with shopping centres, and then presumably the same in terms of public areas as well. So I think that is extremely important. So I do think there is more of a focus, and certainly at the time I've been sort of working in this area, I do think there has been a shift from people, for instance, in an architect's practice, just letting sort of the junior, if you like, specify those, the unfortunate areas we have to do the toilets, to working with some, quite, top end architects practices who really have sort of focused on their washrooms and realised the importance of them.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I'm now going to pose a question to each of you, and it's a double-headed question. First of all, what does success look like? And secondly, what's the one policy, and very strictly the one policy which you think can get us to success? So, Karen, can I start with you, please?
Well, in terms of us in the world of changing places, success would be having a changing place toilet in every place where there's public toilets, where you'd expect to go to the toilet for any able-bodied person. We want to see, world domination with changing places. To be honest, that would be a success for us, was to be able to have them in every place you would expect to have access to a normal toilet. In terms of policy, I'd probably want to shift more into the regulations rather than policy. With us, it's fantastic to get this into the building regs for new buildings going forward. So that, to be honest, is more than we could ask for, for that going forward to start from January, because it really is going to open the door and increase the amount of changing places available for average users. So I think legislation is something more that we'll be jumping up and down about over policy when it comes to changing places toilets.
Thanks, Karen. And as our kind of other changing places expert, I'll come to you next, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo certainly what Karen was saying in terms of success. I think the policy wise, or the work to be done on that, I think obviously a lot of this is going to come from government and local authorities. And I think with the government, with the experience of sort of changing places, you've always got to keep on at the government, because they're quite nimble in some ways of promising funding, but then making it very difficult to spend it, and putting barriers in. So I think any sort of initiative with washrooms going forward has got to be really pressed hard home really with the government to make sure that money is spent, and make sure there's no way that it can be held back or slowed down in any way.
Thanks, Ian. Tom, what does success look like for you, and how are we going to get there?
Success for me looks like is when maps like Lockdown Loo aren't needed anymore, because there are toilets on every street corner, in parks, and they are available to people of all backgrounds and activities. So that's success. And I think one thing I want to change is the passing of the buck, throwing it, throwing it down the road, and seeing a little bit more connectedness between governments, rather than just, you know, central government and local authorities throwing issues between one another. Actually, you know, having that sort of linear strategy all the way down of both talking about public toilets and growing them from the position they are in at the moment.
Thanks, Tom. Tony?
Tom, can I just say at this stage, I need to send my apologies and disappear. So I have another meeting to go to, but thank you so much for the invite. It's been really good debates and discussions today. I look forward to hear the end of it. So thank you very much for the invite, and best of luck to the rest of you.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Tony?
Right, so I think success would be a real change of attitudes towards public toilets. Several people actually wanted to do them because they saw that it was bringing value to their areas and encouraging tourism, etc. And perhaps returning a little bit to the heydays of some of these wonderful Victorian toilets that we used to be, which were very, very elaborate. I guess in terms of policy, making a provision of public toilets compulsory on a sort of well-planned and regulated basis, so that it is probably top down, and it means that we're going to get the toilets on every street corner that Tom mentioned.
Raymond?
I agree with what's been said. I think legislation drives funding. If the government put legislation in place, then they'd have to back it up with the funding to put those things in place. Probably, I think that's certainly what the BTA has been driving for 20 years and will continue to work at. I'd like to see a minister taking control. I'd like to see the Department of Health stand up to their requirements. There's equality issues here. There's social inclusion. There's all the things about health and well-being. I'd like to see the government appointing someone to look after those things, and that person then wanting to collaborate with a group like this, and probably maybe some other colleagues who would come and join us, I'm sure, at the same time, to offer advice and guidance and expert support, because it's so very vital that we do this. It's so vital that these things are available, and they aren't going to be unless we have money, because while we leave them open, then we're going to be attacked. Antisocial activity and drugs and various other bits and pieces which are dragging these things down, and we're going to lose more and more if we don't turn this around through a refocusing, this government focusing on the way ahead.
Thank you, Raymond. And last but not least, Richard.
Yeah, probably along the lines of everything that everybody said, because it's difficult to pick out one. But for me, and probably on the topic that I've probably spoken to you most about, Tom, is that from a success point of view, that there's a realization that how important this service is and these facilities are. I think it's people don't realize what impact they actually have within communities and within a lot of sort of everyday walks of life. I guess if you don't, it's one of those things. If you don't need it, you don't think about it. And I think that's a bit of success on top of everybody else's comments. And again, I guess it's policy and legislation that then leads down to preventing the whole service offer being fragmented. So ensuring there is somebody, as you said, the health minister, that drives it through, so it doesn't end up falling in with the parish council to maintain that. And I think that's the type of regulation or policy that we're looking for. That and an accountability of if it's in place, it's implemented, because it's very easy to put some things in place and actually nobody really feels accountable to. So I think it'd be good to be able to see something along those lines where we can see some success from it and actually see the change. And one point just on all of this is, I think that the key is that anything that we do going forward, this isn't just an element of, this hasn't just happened because of COVID. It's been going on for a long time. And I think we need to be really careful that we don't fall into that, oh, it's COVID and it's over. Actually, it's been accelerated by COVID, certainly the infrastructure side of things, but there's an element that this has been happening for, I don't know the exact years, but over a certain, and Raymond and probably Tony know better than me, but over several years. So I think COVID's just maybe accelerated it, and it might help us in terms of being able to raise the profile as well.
Thanks, Rich. Look, this has been an incredibly insightful and interesting discussion. I think that one of the biggest challenges in setting this up is actually limiting the number of people on the round table so we can make it a meaningful discussion, because there's so many people that are interested in this agenda and a lot of passion. So I think really there is some momentum for policymakers to pay attention to discussions like this, and look forward to having some future really meaningful debates to push forward this agenda. We've reached a consensus today around the aspiration, what we want to see, and what success looks like. I think there's a consensus too around the need for coherence and pulling together the ownership on this. I think there's the bones of an action plan as well from what we've discussed. So I want to thank each of our panelists, including Karen, who unfortunately had to make an early exit. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for the team at Brewer for pulling this together as well. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Tom.